I built my parents a $500,000 custom mansion as a thank you for raising me. But when I showed up for a surprise Sunday dinner, my father was shaking on the front porch, while a strange man took photos of the foyer. The house I paid for with my own blood, sweat, and tears was being sold right under my nose. I stepped through those custom mahogany doors and uncovered a betrayal so deep it forced me to financially ruin the very people who gave me life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach your family a harsh lesson about loyalty and respect. Trust me, you will want to hear how I handled the ultimate betrayal. My name is Alicia. I am 35 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have poured every ounce of my energy into building my own wealth management firm right here in Atlanta. As an African American woman in a male-dominated financial sector, I had to work twice as hard to secure my seat at the table. But I did it. I built a lucrative empire from the ground up, fighting for every single client and every dollar. When I finally reached a place of undeniable comfort, my first thought was to give back to the people who raised me. My parents, James and Beatrice, had lived in the same cramped, drafty house on the south side for my entire life. I wanted to give them peace. I wanted to give them luxury. So I bought a beautiful plot of land in a quiet, affluent suburb and spent $500,000 building them a custom home. It was a stunning property. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a chef-style kitchen with marble countertops, and a sprawling backyard lined with ancient oak trees. I paid for the architects, the contractors, and every single piece of high-end furniture inside. I handed them the keys 2 years ago, believing it was the ultimate gesture of daughterly love. I thought I was securing their retirement and showing them that my success was their success. I had no idea I was merely setting the stage for my own heartbreak. It all unraveled on a gorgeous Sunday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a stressful week of demanding client meetings and decided to drive over to my parents' house unannounced. I even stopped at their favorite local bakery to pick up a fresh peach cobbler. The drive through their manicured, quiet neighborhood always filled me with a profound sense of pride. I had done that. I had given them this beautiful, safe environment. But as I turned my luxury sedan into their winding, paved driveway, that warm feeling of pride vanished entirely, replaced by an icy knot of dread in the pit of my stomach. Something was terribly wrong. My father James was standing out on the wraparound porch. Even from the driveway I could see the heavy beads of sweat shining on his forehead in the afternoon sun. He was nervously wringing his hands, constantly shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, bracing for the floor to drop. And he was not alone. A white man in a sharp, tailored navy blue suit was pacing aggressively back and forth across the front porch. He held a sleek tablet in one hand and a laser measuring tool in the other. As I parked my car and stepped out the peach cobbler completely forgotten on the passenger seat, I watched this stranger point his tablet toward the custom mahogany double doors I had personally picked out. He snapped a photo, jotted something down, and then pushed past my father to step right into the foyer. My father did not stop him. He did not say a word. He just looked down at his shoes in defeat. My heart started pounding furiously against my ribs. I walked quickly up the paved walkway, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. I called out to my father, demanding to know what was going on and who this man was. James jolted at the sound of my voice. His eyes went wide with sheer panic, and he took a stumbling step backward, as if he wanted to hide behind one of the grand porch columns. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, stammering sound came out. I did not wait for him to find his courage. I brushed past him and walked straight through the open front doors into the grand foyer. The stranger was standing in the center of the imported tile floor, aiming his laser pointer at the vaulted ceiling. He moved with an entitled swagger, completely at ease, in a home that did not belong to him. "Excuse me," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large space. I kept my tone perfectly level, relying on the cold, authoritative cadence I used in boardrooms. "Who are you? Who? And what exactly are you doing in my parents' house?" The man lowered his measuring tool and turned around. He flashed a practiced $1 million smile that did not reach his eyes. He looked me up and down clearly, trying to place who I was. "Oh, hello there," he said, his tone dripping with the kind of forced cheerfulness only salespeople possess. "You must be part of the family. I am Jason, the listing agent. I am just getting the final measurements and listing photos squared away. We have a very aggressive timeline to meet." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Listing agent. Listing photos. I felt the ground literally tilt beneath my feet. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the impossible information he had just delivered with a smile. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing my racing heart to steady. Listing photos for what exactly I asked, my voice dropping an octave, turning cold and demanding. Jason chuckled, clearly amused by my apparent confusion. "For the house, of course. We are closing the deal on Friday. We just locked in an all-cash offer for $650,000. It is a beautiful property. Your parents are walking away with a very nice return on their investment." I slowly turned around to look at the front doorway. My father was still standing there, his head bowed, entirely unable to meet my furious gaze. The silence in the foyer was deafening. Every drop of blood in my body seemed to turn to ice. My parents were selling the custom $500,000 home I had built and paid for from the ground up. They had hired a realtor, they had accepted an offer, and they had done it all completely behind my back, smiling in my face every single time I visited. "Dad," I whispered, the sting of betrayal burning fiercely in the back of my throat. "What is he talking about?" Before my father could muster a single word of defense, the sharp click of low heels sounded from the kitchen hallway. My mother, Beatrice, walked into the foyer. She wore her Sunday best, her posture rigid, and her expression entirely unreadable. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look guilty. She simply folded her arms across her chest, lifted her chin, and met my horrified stare with absolute chilling calm. "It is our house, Alicia." Beatrice said, her voice completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "We can sell it if we want to." Jason, the listing agent, coughed awkwardly into his fist. He realized instantly that he had stepped right into the middle of a massive family explosion. He quickly tapped his tablet screen and backed toward the door, his professional smile dropping into a grimace. "I will just leave the preliminary paperwork on the kitchen counter," he mumbled, slipping past me out the front door and closing it tightly behind him. The heavy thud of the door shutting felt like a judge slamming a gavel. I looked from my mother, who was standing tall and defiant, to my father, who was now suddenly fascinated by the intricate grout lines in the floor tiles. I stepped closer to them, my hands trembling with a mixture of raw rage and profound heartbreak. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it professional. "You cannot sell this house. I built it for you. I paid for the land. I paid for the foundation. I paid for the roof over your heads." Beatrice let out a short, dismissive sigh, looking at me as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "Do not raise your voice at me in my own home," she scolded. "You gifted us this property, Alicia. A gift belongs to the receiver, and as the owners, your father and I have decided it is time to downsize." "Downsize?" I repeated the word, tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. "You have lived here for exactly 2 years. You have a beautiful garden you love. Dad has his custom wood shop in the garage, and I specifically had the architect design a single-story floor plan so his bad knees would not bother him. Why on earth would you suddenly need an all-cash buyer and a closing date in 5 days?" My father finally looked up, his eyes glassy and filled with deep shame. "It is your sister," he whispered softly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his guilt. "We have to help Vanessa." The mere mention of my younger sister made my blood run cold. Vanessa was the perpetual golden child, the beautiful baby of the family, who could do absolutely no wrong. 3 years ago, she married Trevor, a white man who wore designer suits he could not afford, and spoke down to everyone in our family. Trevor ran a boutique marketing firm that he constantly bragged about at family gatherings, even though my background in wealth management told me his numbers never added up. He was all flash and zero substance, and he treated my parents like the help. Trevor is facing bankruptcy, my mother stated, crossing her arms tighter across her chest to build a wall between us. His firm has hit a severe rough patch. If he does not secure a massive injection of capital by the end of the month, the bank is going to foreclose on their home. They will lose everything, Alicia. The cars, the house, his reputation. We are cashing out the equity in this property to give them the $650,000. I literally stumbled back a step, leaning against the foyer wall, just to keep myself upright. I could not comprehend the sheer audacity of what she was saying. You are selling the home I built for you just to hand the cash over to Trevor? I asked, my voice dropping to a breathless, horrified whisper. You are liquidating my $500,000 investment to save his fragile ego and his failing vanity project. Beatrice took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing with harsh, unforgiving judgment. This is what family does, she snapped, her tone dripping with venom. We sacrifice for each other. You sit up in your fancy downtown office hoarding your wealth, completely out of touch with what real people go through. You have plenty of money, Alicia. You are a single woman with no husband, no children, and no legacy to provide for. Your sister is drowning. A real family throws a lifeline. Every single word felt like a physical blow to the chest. It did not matter that I had worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to pull myself up. It did not matter that I had single-handedly paid for Vanessa to have the extravagant destination wedding Trevor insisted on because he refused to pay for it himself. In my mother's eyes, my hard-earned success was just a communal bank account for the golden child to tap into whenever she pleased. I looked at my father, praying he would step in. But James stood silently in the background, offering no defense for me. He chose to let my mother verbally tear me apart, just to keep his own peace. I felt a hot, burning tear slide down my cheek, but I quickly wiped it away. The devastating hurt was rapidly transforming into a cold, calculated fury. I straightened my posture, wiping away the heartbroken daughter and channeling the ruthless financial executive that they so clearly resented. You are right about one thing, Mother, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady calm. A gift belongs to the receiver. But you seem to forget who handled the legal and financial paperwork for this entire build. I turned on my heel and marched back to the front door. You cannot sell a house if you do not have clear title, I called out over my shoulder. I am calling my attorney right now, and I am putting an immediate stop to this ridiculous sale. I pulled the heavy mahogany door open and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, leaving my shattered illusion of a loving family behind in that foyer. I marched down the paved walkway to my car, got in, and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone screen. I immediately dialed the number for the prominent real estate attorney my firm used, fully confident that I could freeze this transaction before Friday. After all I had paid for the property, I held all the financial records. There was absolutely no way they could legally bypass me and sell the house to a stranger, or so I thought. The terrifying reality of what my own mother had actually done behind my back to secure that money for Trevor was about to hit me harder than anything that had just happened in that house. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone, completely unaware that I was about to hit a legal brick wall that would change my family forever. The dial tone buzzed in my ear for only a few seconds before Lawrence, the senior real estate attorney my firm kept on retainer, answered the call. I was sitting in the driver's seat of my car, parked just down the street from the house I had built. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The vicious words my mother had just thrown at me were still ringing in my head. She truly believed that because I was a single successful woman without children, my assets were simply a communal safety net for my sister and her failing white husband. Lawrence, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. I need you to file an emergency injunction on a property sale immediately. It is the house I built for my parents. They are trying to sell it to an all-cash buyer by Friday, and I need to stop the closing. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The sound of rapid typing echoed through the phone speaker. Alicia Lawrence said, his tone shifting into his careful professional mode. Let me pull up the county tax assessor portal. Give me just 1 second. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest and closed my eyes. I was already calculating how much this was going to cost in legal fees, but I did not care. It was the principle of the matter. They were not going to reward Trevor for his financial incompetence using my hard-earned money. Alicia Lawrence said again, his voice now tinged with genuine confusion. I am looking at the county deed records right now. I cannot file an injunction on this sale. What are you talking about? I demanded, my eyes snapping open. Of course you can. I am the legal owner of that property. I hold the deed in my safe deposit box. No, you do not, Lawrence replied quietly. According to the county records, a quitclaim deed was filed 4 weeks ago. It transferred 100% of your ownership rights directly into your parents' names. The house belongs to them free and clear. I am emailing you a copy of the recorded document right now. My phone buzzed against my cheek. I pulled it away and opened my email inbox. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to tap the screen 3 times before the PDF document finally opened. I stared at the glowing screen in absolute horror. It was a standard quitclaim deed filed perfectly with the county clerk. At the bottom of the page on the line designated for the grantor was my signature. It looked exactly like my handwriting. The loops, the slant, the pressure. It was a near-perfect match. But I had never signed this document. I had never even seen this piece of paper before in my life. I zoomed in on the bottom corner of the page. Right next to my forged signature was the official raised seal of a notary public. I read the name printed beneath the seal, and a wave of pure, unadulterated disbelief washed over me. Sister Martha Jenkins. Martha Jenkins was the head of the hospitality committee at the church my parents had attended for 30 years. She had known me since I was in middle school. Lawrence. I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and rising fury. I did not sign this. This is a forgery. My own mother forged my signature. I will start drafting a fraud report for the authorities, Lawrence said immediately, the warmth vanishing from his voice replaced by cold legal precision. But Alicia, if we prove this, your mother is looking at a felony charge. I hung up the phone without answering him. I threw the car into drive and sped out of the neighborhood, heading straight for the community center, where I knew Martha Jenkins ran her Sunday afternoon charity drive. My mother had not just crossed a boundary, she had committed a serious crime, and she had dragged a trusted community member into her web of lies to do it. When I pulled into the community center parking lot, I spotted Martha instantly. She was organizing donation boxes near the back entrance. I slammed my car door and marched straight up to her, holding my phone out with the PDF of the deed clearly displayed on the screen. Martha took one look at my face and took a nervous step backward, dropping a stack of folded clothes into a cardboard box. Sister Martha, I said, my voice dangerously calm, I need you to explain to me why your official notary stamp is sitting next to a forged signature on a legal document, transferring a $500,000 property out of my name. Martha flushed a deep shade of crimson, her eyes darting around the parking lot to see if anyone was listening. Alicia, lower your voice, she hissed defensively. I did not forge anything. Your mother brought that paperwork to me last month. A notary is required by law to witness the signature in person, Martha. I shot back, taking a step closer, forcing her to look me in the eye. You verified a signature for someone who was not in the room. You committed real estate fraud. She crossed her arms defensively, her expression hardening into the exact same look of judgmental disapproval my mother always wore. Your mother told me you signed it that morning before you went to work. She said you were simply too busy with your fancy downtown clients to come down to the church yourself. She said you told her it was fine. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded by the sheer ignorance of her excuse. You broke federal law because Beatrice asked you nicely. It is not a crime to help out a family in crisis. Martha snapped, her tone dripping with self-righteous indignation. Your mother came to me in tears, Alicia. She told me about how Trevor is losing his business and how Vanessa might lose her home. She said you were acting high and mighty again, refusing to help your own sister, just like when you complained about paying for her destination wedding. Your mother said you finally agreed to give them the house, but you wanted to humiliate them by making them handle the paperwork alone. I was just helping Beatrice secure her family's future because you clearly have no interest in doing it. I stood there in the humid afternoon heat, letting her harsh words wash over me. The depth of my mother's manipulation was staggering. Beatrice had not just forged my name. She had weaponized the entire church community against me. She had painted me as the selfish, arrogant villain who hoarded wealth, making herself look like the desperate, loving matriarch, just trying to save her youngest daughter from ruin. Martha was looking at me, not as a victim of a felony, but as a bad daughter who was finally getting what she deserved. If you do not report this to the police right now, I am going to have my lawyer report you to the state licensing board first thing tomorrow morning, I said softly, stripping every ounce of respect from my tone. You will lose your license, Martha, and then you can explain to your pastor why you are facing criminal conspiracy charges. I turned my back on her before she could stutter out a response and walked back to my car. The pieces of the puzzle were firmly locked into place now. I had the proof of the forgery. I knew exactly how Beatrice had pulled it off. All I had to do was call the police and let the authorities arrest my mother for fraud. It would instantly stop the sale of the house and protect my asset. But as I sat in the driver's seat gripping my phone, I hesitated. Sending my mother to federal prison meant destroying my father as well. And James, despite his utter cowardice on the porch today, was the only parent who had ever shown me a shred of genuine affection when I was a child. I knew I had to go back to that house one more time. I had to face them and deliver an ultimatum. They were going to cancel that sale, or I was going to let the police handle it. I started the engine and drove back toward the suburbs, completely unaware that the worst of the family ambush was still waiting for me inside those mahogany doors. I pulled back into the driveway of the house I had built, my tires screeching slightly against the pavement. The real estate agent was gone, but my parents' cars were still parked in the garage. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, fueled by a mixture of profound betrayal and righteous anger. I had the PDF of the forged quitclaim deed pulled up on my phone, the undeniable proof of my mother's crime glowing on the screen. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open and marched straight into the living room. My parents were sitting on the expensive leather sofa I had purchased for them last Christmas. My father was staring blankly at the television, which was muted, while my mother was casually flipping through a luxury home magazine, acting as if she had not just shattered our entire family an hour ago. Beatrice, I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a whip. I did not call her mom. She had lost the right to that title the moment she forged my name. She slowly lowered the magazine, annoyed by my sudden return. I thought I told you to leave, Alicia. We have nothing left to discuss until you calm down and realize this is for the best. I walked right up to the coffee table and slammed my phone down in front of her. The screen illuminated the forged signature and Martha Jenkins' official notary stamp. I just had a very enlightening conversation with the church community center, I said, my tone ice cold. Martha was incredibly eager to tell me exactly how you brought this paperwork to her, fed her a sob story about Vanessa, and convinced her to notarize a signature I never made. For the first time all day, the smug confidence drained entirely from my mother's face. The color vanished from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. She stared at the glowing screen, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. My father leaned forward, squinting at the phone. "What is that?" he asked, his voice trembling. That is a forged quitclaim deed, James, I answered, not taking my eyes off my mother. It is the document your wife used to steal this $500,000 property from me, so she could sell it behind my back. It is also a federal crime. I have my real estate attorney drafting a fraud report right now. By tomorrow morning it will be in the hands of the authorities. You are looking at a felony charge, Beatrice. You are looking at prison time. My father let out a choked gasp. He stood up so fast his knees popped, his hands shaking violently as he reached out to me. Alicia, please, he begged, his voice breaking into a desperate sob. You cannot do this. You cannot send your mother to jail. She is 70 years old. It would kill her. I looked at my father, the only person in this family who had ever shown me a shred of warmth. But right now his tears only fueled my disgust. You stood on that porch and let a stranger measure the house I bought you. I reminded him, my voice tight with emotion. You knew exactly what she was doing, and you said absolutely nothing. You let her steal from me. I did not know about the forgery, I swear to you. My father pleaded, tears spilling down his cheeks. She told me you finally agreed to sign it over to help your sister. I swear on my life, Alicia. Please, do not call the police. We will figure this out. I am begging you as your father. Do not do this to our family. I stared at him, feeling the familiar, suffocating weight of his emotional manipulation settling over my shoulders. He was using my love for him as a shield to protect the woman who had just stabbed me in the back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn the house down to the foundation. But seeing him break down, seeing the genuine terror in his eyes made my iron resolve waver just a fraction. You have 48 hours, I said slowly, the words tasting like poison. You have 48 hours to call that listing agent, cancel the sale, and sign a new deed transferring this property back into my name. If you do not, I am taking this phone straight to the police station. Before either of them could respond, the sound of a luxury sports car engine roared up the driveway, followed by the aggressive honking of a horn. The heavy oak front doors swung open a moment later, and a loud, obnoxious voice echoed through the grand foyer. Pop the champagne, the prodigal daughter has arrived. I turned around slowly, my stomach dropping. Striding into the foyer was my younger sister Vanessa, wearing a designer dress and clutching a massive leather handbag. Right behind her was her husband Trevor. He was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, his blonde hair perfectly styled, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne like he had just won the Super Bowl. Trevor took one look at the tension in the living room and let out a loud, oblivious laugh. Wow, tough crowd, he said, popping the cork on the champagne right there in the entryway. The loud pop echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I guess the big real estate mogul over here is throwing a fit because she is finally not the center of attention. Vanessa walked past me, completely ignoring my presence, and went straight to hug our mother. Oh, Mom, Jason just called us. $650,000. I cannot believe it. This is going to save Trevor's business. You guys are literal lifesavers. Beatrice awkwardly patted Vanessa on the back, her eyes darting nervously toward me. She was terrified I was going to drop the felony bomb right in front of her precious golden child. Trevor strolled into the living room, pouring champagne into glasses he had grabbed from the kitchen. He handed one to Vanessa, and then turned to me, a sickeningly smug grin plastered across his face. He looked at me with the kind of condescending entitlement that always made my blood boil. You know, Alicia, Trevor said, taking a sip of his drink, since you are the supposed wealth management expert, maybe you can finally do something useful for this family. I need some advice on how to structure this incoming cash. The IRS has been breathing down my neck, and I need to know the best way to hide a $650,000 windfall so those leeches do not take a cut of my hard-earned money. I stared at him, absolutely paralyzed by his sheer audacity. He was standing in a house I paid for, drinking champagne out of my glasses, celebrating the theft of my property, and asking me for free financial advice to commit tax fraud. Vanessa chimed in, leaning her head against Trevor's shoulder. Do not bother asking her, babe. Alicia does not understand how real business works. She only got her firm off the ground because of those corporate diversity quotas anyway. She does not know what it takes to build a legacy from scratch like you do. Plus, since she does not have a husband or any kids to provide for, she is just bitter that our parents actually want to invest in a real family's future. I looked at my parents. My mother was standing silently refusing to correct her golden child. My father was looking at the floor, too cowardly to defend me against his white son-in-law. They were perfectly willing to let me be humiliated in my own home just to keep up the illusion that Trevor was a successful businessman and Vanessa was the perfect wife. A dangerous, terrifying calm suddenly washed over me. The hurt and the heartbreak evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. They did not just want my money. They wanted me to bow down and accept my place as the family ATM, entirely stripped of my dignity. I did not yell. I did not throw the champagne in Trevor's face. I simply offered a tight, polite smile. "You know what, Trevor?" I said, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. "You are absolutely right. I am just a bitter single woman. I think it is best if I leave you all to celebrate your massive success." I picked up my phone from the coffee table, gave my mother one last chilling look, and walked out of the house. I let them drink their champagne. I let them dream about their $650,000. Because as I walked to my car, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was not going to call the police on my mother. I was going to do something much, much worse. I was going to let them sit at the closing table, and then I was going to take absolutely everything from them. The drive back to downtown Atlanta was a blur of neon lights and rushing traffic. My mind was racing, cataloging every single financial maneuver I needed to execute before Friday morning. As I gripped the steering wheel, the confrontation with Martha Jenkins replayed in my head on a maddening loop. "Your mother said you were too busy with your fancy downtown clients to come sign, just like you were too busy to help pay for Vanessa and Trevor to have their wedding." That was the narrative my mother had spun to our entire community. That I was the selfish, hoarding older sister who abandoned her family the second she got a taste of corporate success. In a traditional African-American family community, perception is everything. Beatrice knew exactly how to weaponize the church gossip mill to paint herself as the long-suffering matriarch. But the reality of our family dynamic was a completely different story, and I had the bank statements to prove it. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the sleek glass high-rise that housed my firm, Sterling Wealth Management. The building was mostly empty on a Sunday evening, which was exactly what I needed. I badged into the executive suite and walked straight to my corner office. I did not even bother turning on the main overhead lights, opting instead for the sharp glow of my desk lamp. I logged into my secure terminal and opened my personal archives. I clicked on a folder labeled Family Expenses, a digital ledger I had maintained for the last decade. It was a massive, exhausting catalog of every time I had bailed out my parents and my sister. Vanessa had always been the golden child. When we were growing up, my parents praised her for simply existing while I was expected to earn every ounce of basic affection through straight A report cards and scholarship awards. When I graduated at the top of my class, my mother complained that the commencement ceremony was too long. When Vanessa barely passed her community college courses, they threw a massive barbecue to celebrate her effort. But the most glaring proof of their hypocrisy was sitting right on my screen: the wedding. 3 years ago, Trevor had convinced Vanessa they needed a luxury destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas to match his supposed status as a rising marketing mogul. He promised to cover the entire cost. But 2 months before the big day, his funding mysteriously fell through. My parents came to me panicked and crying, begging me to save Vanessa from the ultimate humiliation of canceling her dream wedding. I clicked open the wire transfer receipts. $45,000. I had paid for the beachfront venue. I had paid for the imported floral arrangements. I had even paid for Trevor to have his custom-tailored tuxedo. I did it because I loved my sister and I wanted her to be happy. Yet the moment the bills were cleared, Trevor took all the credit during his reception speech, thanking my parents for their support while conveniently forgetting to mention my name. And my parents let him. They actively allowed the narrative that I was a bitter, unsupportive spinster to flourish simply because correcting it would mean admitting their perfect white son-in-law was a broke fraud. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the numbers. They had taken my money, erased my contributions, and then used that fabricated history to justify stealing my $500,000 property. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. A soft knock on my office door broke my concentration. Malik, my lead forensic accountant, stepped into the room. He was a brilliant, sharp-minded man who had been with my firm since day one. He was holding 2 cups of black coffee. "I saw your car in the garage," Malik said, setting a cup down on my desk. "You only come in on a Sunday night when a client is about to make a terrible mistake. Who are we saving today?" "I am not saving anyone, Malik," I replied, picking up the coffee. The warmth seeping into my cold hands felt grounding. "I need you to run a deep dive forensic audit on Trevor. His boutique marketing firm, his personal accounts, everything. I need to know exactly how deep in the hole he is, and I need the results before Friday morning." Malik raised an eyebrow, sensing the quiet, dangerous shift in my tone. He pulled up a chair and opened his secure laptop. "What exactly are we looking for, Alicia?" "My parents are trying to sell the suburban house I built for them," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly level. "They forged my signature on a quitclaim deed and transferred the title into their names. They are liquidating the property to hand a $650,000 cash buyout to Trevor because he claims his business is failing." Malik stopped typing. He looked at me, genuine shock registering on his face. "Your own mother forged a deed. Alicia, we need to call the authorities. We can have that sale frozen by tomorrow." "No," I said sharply. "If I call the police, they will play the victim. They will drag my name through the mud, claiming I am a heartless corporate shark sending her elderly mother to prison over a simple misunderstanding. They want to play a high-stakes financial game, so I am going to show them exactly why I run this firm." I opened a separate, highly encrypted file on my desktop and turned my monitor toward Malik. "Look at this." Malik adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. A slow, deeply satisfied smile began to spread across his face. "You absolute genius," he whispered in awe. "You prepared for this. 2 years ago, when I originally bought the land and hired the contractors to build the mansion, I did not put the construction contracts in my personal name. I used a private limited liability company that I had set up specifically for real estate investments. Legally, my LLC was the entity that funded and built the physical structure of the house. And before I ever handed my parents the keys, my LLC placed a $550,000 mechanic and construction lien on the property to cover the cost of the build. They forged a deed for the land." I told Malik, the cold reality of my trap finally locking into place. "But they do not own the house sitting on top of it. My LLC does. And that lien is sitting quietly in the county records, completely unbothered by their forged quitclaim deed." So when they sit down at the closing table on Friday, Malik concluded, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he pulled up the county portal to verify the lien. "The title agent is going to run the final check. The sale will be allowed to proceed, but by federal law, the lien must be satisfied first." "Exactly," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "The cash buyer will hand over $650,000. $550,000 of that will go directly into my corporate account. The remaining $100,000 will be instantly devoured by realtor commissions, closing costs, and the back taxes my parents have probably ignored. They are going to walk away with absolutely nothing," Malik said, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "They are going to sell the house and hand you the cash. They wanted to treat my assets like a communal bank account," I said, staring out the window at the glittering Atlanta skyline. "Now they are going to learn what happens when the bank decides to foreclose. Find out what Trevor is hiding, Malik. I want to know exactly what kind of monster my parents sacrificed me for." The Monday morning sun felt completely devoid of warmth as I drove my car back out to the suburban mansion. After leaving my office and my forensic accountant Malik late Sunday night, I had barely managed to sleep for 2 hours. My mind had been a relentless storm of legal strategies, betrayal, and profound grief. I had the ultimate financial trap set with my corporate lien, but a heavy, agonizing truth was sitting on my chest. If I let this go all the way to Friday without giving my parents one last chance to do the right thing, our family would be permanently destroyed. I needed to look my father in the eye one last time. Beatrice had always been cold and dismissive, openly favoring my sister Vanessa. But my father James had been the one to dry my tears when I was a child. He was the one who celebrated my college acceptance. I needed to know if the man who raised me was truly willing to throw me to the wolves to save a white son-in-law who secretly despised us. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the heavy mahogany front doors. I did not bother knocking. I used my key, the same key I had excitedly handed them 2 years ago, and stepped into the quiet house. The smell of black coffee and toast drifted from the kitchen. I walked down the wide hallway and found my parents sitting at the marble island. They looked exhausted. The celebratory champagne from yesterday was nowhere in sight. Beatrice was staring out the window at the garden, her face drawn and tense. James was hunched over his mug, rubbing his temples. They both froze the moment my heels clicked against the kitchen tile. I reached into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. I tossed it onto the marble island. It landed with a heavy, definitive smack right next to my mother's coffee mug. "What is this?" Beatrice asked, her voice tight, refusing to touch the envelope. "That is a fully drafted, comprehensive police report," I stated, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. "It contains a copy of the forged quitclaim deed, a sworn statement from the real estate attorney, and a detailed timeline of exactly how you manipulated Martha Jenkins into illegally using her notary stamp. All it is missing is my signature at the bottom. Once I sign it, I hand it to a detective at the precinct. They will issue a warrant for your arrest before dinner." All the color immediately drained from my mother's face. The harsh, arrogant matriarch who had scolded me yesterday vanished, replaced by a terrified elderly woman staring at the very real consequences of her actions. "Federal fraud is not a family disagreement, Beatrice." I continued, leaning forward and placing both hands flat on the marble counter. "It is a felony. You are looking at a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary." James stood up so fast his heavy wooden bar stool scraped violently across the floor, tipping backward and crashing to the tiles. He did not even look at it. He lunged around the kitchen island and grabbed my arms, his grip trembling with sheer panic. "Alicia." "No," my father gasped, his voice instantly breaking. "You cannot do this. You cannot send your own mother to prison. We will lose everything. The scandal will ruin us. Our church, our friends, everything we have built." I stared into my father's eyes, desperately searching for an apology, for some acknowledgement of the pain they had caused me. But all I saw was a desperate need to protect his own comfort. "You let her forge my name, Dad," I said, my voice finally cracking under the immense emotional weight. "You stood by and let her steal a $500,000 house from your own daughter. You let Vanessa and Trevor humiliate me in my own home. Where was your concern for me?" James fell to his knees right there on the kitchen floor. It was a sight that absolutely shattered my heart. This proud, stoic, African-American man, who had worked his entire life to maintain his dignity, was sobbing at my feet, clutching the fabric of my tailored trousers. "I am sorry," he wept, the tears flowing freely down his wrinkled cheeks. "I am so sorry, Alicia. I was weak. Your mother was terrified for Vanessa, and I just wanted the fighting to stop. I just wanted peace in my house. But you cannot put her in the system. You know what the justice system does to our people. If she goes to prison, the stress will kill her. And if she dies in a cell, it will kill me too." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He was pulling out the ultimate weapon, using my deep, enduring love for him as a chain to bind my hands. You will be burying both of your parents, Alicia. He sobbed, his voice raw and ragged. Please, you are my smart girl. You are the strong one. You always have been. Show us mercy. I am begging you on my knees as your father. Do not do this. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating, broken only by the sound of my father's heavy, ragged breathing. I looked over at Beatrice. She was completely silent, her head bowed in shame, letting her husband do the begging for her. I felt physically sick. My father was weaponizing the very love and respect he had failed to show me. He was using his own frailty to shield a criminal act. And the worst part was, it was working. Despite the anger burning in my veins, I could not stomach the image of my father wasting away from the grief of watching his wife get handcuffed and dragged out of this beautiful home I had built for them. I slowly reached down and placed my hands on his shoulders, gently pulling him up from the floor. He leaned heavily against the counter, wiping his face with the back of his trembling hand. I picked up the manila envelope from the island. I will not go to the police today, I said softly, my voice devoid of warmth. James let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief, reaching out to touch my arm, but I stepped back out of his reach. But I am not giving you a free pass. I continued, my tone hardening into cold steel. You have 48 hours. You have exactly 2 days to call that real estate agent, cancel the all-cash sale, and instruct the title company to draft a new deed, transferring this house back into my name. Beatrice finally looked up, her eyes wide with panic. But Trevor needs the money by Friday, she whispered. The bank is going to take Vanessa's house. That is Trevor's problem, I snapped, my voice echoing sharply off the kitchen walls. He is a grown man playing pretend with money he does not have. You are not going to sacrifice my life to save his. 48 hours. If Wednesday morning arrives and I do not have a cancellation notice in my inbox, I am taking this envelope straight to the authorities. I do not care about the scandal. I do not care about the church. And I will not protect you anymore. I turned my back on them and walked out of the house. I did not look back. When I got back to my car, I gripped the steering wheel and let out a long, ragged exhale. The clock to the closing table was now violently ticking. I knew in my gut that Beatrice was not going to cancel the sale. Her obsession with protecting Vanessa and her desperate need to keep up appearances with her white son-in-law would override her fear of the police. She would gamble that I was bluffing. She would gamble that my love for my father would keep me from pulling the trigger. And in a tragic way, she was right. I was never going to file that police report. I was not going to send my mother to a federal prison and destroy my father's remaining years. But they did not know that. More importantly, they did not know about the massive corporate lien my company had sitting silently on the county records. The ultimatum I just delivered was simply a final test. I gave them a chance to walk away with their dignity intact. When they inevitably failed that test and pushed forward to the closing table on Friday, they would trigger the trap themselves. I would not need to send them to jail. I was going to let the law legally strip the money right out of their hands in front of everyone. Wednesday afternoon arrived, marking the exact end of the 48-hour window I had given my parents. I sat at my desk at Sterling Wealth Management, refreshing my email inbox one last time. There was no message from the title company. There was no desperate apology from my father. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text message from Vanessa. It was an invitation to a family dinner at the mansion that evening. She claimed Beatrice wanted us all to sit down and clear the air before Friday. It was a thinly veiled trap, a final attempt to force me to smile and bless their theft. I decided to go. I wanted to look them in the eyes and watch them celebrate, knowing the absolute financial devastation that was waiting for them in just 2 days. When I pulled into the driveway of the mansion that evening, Trevor had parked his leased luxury sports utility vehicle dead center, forcing me to park on the street. It was a petty, deliberate power play. I walked up the paved path and let myself in. The moment I stepped into the foyer, I could hear loud, obnoxious laughter echoing from the kitchen. I walked down the hall and found Trevor holding court at the Marble Island. He was wearing a designer cashmere sweater draped over his shoulders like a country club villain. He had completely taken over the space. My mother was stirring a pot on the stove, refusing to look at me while my father sat silently at the table nursing a glass of water. Trevor did not even acknowledge my entrance with a hello. Instead, he reached into the custom wine refrigerator I had installed and pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne I had been saving for my firm anniversary. Without asking, he peeled the foil and popped the cork. The loud crack made my father flinch. "We are celebrating," Trevor announced, pouring the sparkling wine into 3 glasses and completely ignoring me. "The bank approved the final wire transfer protocols today. Come Friday afternoon, we are going to be flush with cash." Vanessa walked into the kitchen adjusting her expensive jewelry. She took a glass from Trevor and leaned against the counter looking at me with a sickeningly sweet smile. "I am so glad you decided to show up, Alicia. Mom said you were being a little dramatic on Monday, but I knew you would come around. After all, family supports family." I stood near the doorway, keeping my expression entirely neutral. I watched Trevor take a long sip of my expensive champagne. He sighed in exaggerated satisfaction, setting the glass down and turning his full smug attention toward me. "You know," Alicia, Trevor began, his voice dripping with condescension, "since you are the supposed financial genius of the family, I actually have a question for you. I am looking to restructure some of my corporate accounts once this $650,000 clears. The government takes way too much from hard-working entrepreneurs like me. I need to know the best offshore strategies or tax loopholes to make sure the Internal Revenue Service does not get their grubby little hands on my money." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his request hang in the air. He was standing in a house I built, drinking a $200 bottle of champagne he stole from my fridge, celebrating the theft of my property, and asking me for free professional advice on how to commit federal tax evasion. It was almost beautiful how oblivious he was to his own impending doom. I slowly walked over to the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of tap water. "I am a wealth manager, Trevor," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "I help legitimate businesses grow their assets. I do not help failing marketing agencies hide money they have not even earned yet." Trevor scoffed, his face flushing a dull red. "Failing? Is that what you think? Just because I do not work in a sterile corporate cubicle like you do does not mean my business is failing. I am making strategic liquidations. It takes money to make money. But I guess a single woman who only cares about her own bank account would not understand the pressure of building a real legacy." Vanessa chimed in immediately, rushing to defend her fragile husband. "Stop being so bitter, Alicia. Trevor is a visionary. You should be taking notes from him instead of acting so jealous. The only reason you even have a firm is because they needed to fill a diversity quota downtown. You do not know what it takes to build a brand from scratch." My parents remained completely silent. Beatrice kept stirring her pot, pretending she was deaf. James stared intensely at his water glass. They were letting Trevor and Vanessa verbally tear down my entire career just to keep the peace. They were actively participating in my humiliation. I took a slow sip of my water, feeling that cold, calculated clarity wash over me again. I did not need to yell. I did not need to defend my accomplishments to a man who was days away from a massive reality check. "You might want to hold off on planning your offshore tax fraud, Trevor," I said smoothly, setting my glass down. "You cannot hide money you do not have." Trevor laughed, a harsh, arrogant sound. "The deed is already in your parents' names, Alicia. The buyer is bringing cash. The money is as good as mine." I offered him a tight, polite smile. "We will see about that on Friday." I turned to my mother, who finally froze her stirring. "Thank you for the invitation, Beatrice, but I think I have lost my appetite. Enjoy the champagne." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving them to their delusions. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed my forensic accountant. "Ensure the deep dive on Trevor is completely finished by Thursday night," I said into the receiver. "I want every single dark financial secret he has printed and bound in a folder. I'm going to need it for the closing table." I had every intention of walking straight out the front door and leaving them to their delusions, but as my hand grasped the heavy brass handle, my father called out from the hallway. His voice was low, trembling, with a pathetic kind of desperation. He begged me to just stay for the meal. He said Beatrice had been cooking all afternoon, and he just wanted his two girls to sit at the same table one last time before the house sold. I closed my eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. Running away would only give Trevor and Vanessa the satisfaction of thinking they had intimidated me. It would validate their twisted narrative that I was the bitter, retreating older sister. I released the door handle, turned around on my heels, and followed my father into the formal dining room. The dining space was a masterpiece I had personally designed. A massive slab of reclaimed walnut I had custom ordered from an artisan in North Carolina sat in the center of the room, surrounded by plush high-backed chairs. A stunning crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the fine china and sterling silverware. It was a room built for a wealthy, loving family. Instead, it was currently hosting a den of thieves. Trevor had immediately claimed the head of the table. It was a subtle but deeply arrogant power play. This was a man who was days away from a total financial collapse, yet he sat back in the master chair with his legs crossed, swirling his stolen vintage champagne like a medieval king, surveying his subjects. Vanessa sat to his immediate right, touching up her lip gloss in the reflection of her butter knife. When Beatrice brought out the roasted chicken and heavy ceramic bowls of side dishes, the atmosphere shifted from tense to suffocating. Nobody thanked her. Nobody said grace. Trevor immediately began serving himself the largest portions, dominating the conversation with his usual loud, empty bravado. "It is a brutally tough market out there for real innovators." Trevor sighed loudly, cutting a large piece of chicken and gesturing with his fork. "The government is absolutely strangling small businesses with regulations and taxes. You cannot imagine the kind of pressure I am under, having a payroll to meet and investors breathing down my neck. It takes a true visionary to navigate these waters without compromising the integrity of the brand." I carefully set my napkin in my lap and looked at him. "I manage hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate and personal assets, Trevor," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "I am actually intimately familiar with market pressures." Trevor let out a condescending chuckle, shaking his head as if I had just told a cute joke. He reached for the wine bottle and topped off his glass. "Sure, Alicia," he said, flashing that infuriatingly smug smile. "But let us be brutally honest here. You work in a highly insulated, rigid corporate structure. You just push paper around for rich people who already have money. And let us not pretend the corporate world is not practically bending over backwards to hand out executive titles to women of color right now. It is all about the diversity quotas. Companies need people who look like you in the boardroom so they can look good for their shareholders and avoid public relations nightmares." The room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. "If you were a white guy like me," Trevor continued, entirely oblivious, or simply indifferent to the massive racial and professional insult he had just launched across the table, trying to build a brand from the absolute ground up without any of those corporate safety nets or diversity handouts, "you would see how hard it really is. You get to play with a safety harness. Real entrepreneurs like me are walking the tightrope without a net." I sat completely frozen, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated poison of his words. This mediocre, failing man who was currently relying on a stolen $650,000 handout from my parents just to stay out of federal prison had the absolute audacity to look me in the eye and attribute a decade of my grueling 80-hour workweeks to a diversity quota. I had fought tooth and nail for every single promotion, battling the exact kind of insidious, arrogant bias he was currently spewing, only to have him reduce my entire empire to a corporate charity case. I looked at my parents, waiting for the inevitable defense. I waited for James to stand up and demand respect for his eldest daughter. I waited for Beatrice to reprimand her son-in-law for speaking to me that way in a house I had built with the very money he was insulting. James stared intensely at his mashed potatoes, chewing slowly, his shoulders hunched in cowardice. Beatrice simply took a sip of her water, refusing to meet my gaze. They were going to let him say whatever he wanted as long as he kept up the illusion of being a successful husband to their golden child. "Wow," I said softly, the single syllable sharp enough to cut glass. Vanessa immediately jumped in, sensing the dangerous shift in my tone and rushing to shield her husband. "Oh, please do not start acting so defensive, Alicia. Trevor is just explaining the realities of the modern market. You always take everything as a personal attack just because you are not the center of attention." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the walnut table, and fixed me with a look of profound, venomous pity. This was her specialty. Vanessa knew exactly where my deepest insecurities lived, and she never hesitated to weaponize them when she felt threatened. "You are just so completely focused on money and property because you do not have anything else in your life," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You go home to an empty luxury condo every single night. You simply do not understand what it means to build a legacy for the next generation. You do not understand the sacrifices a mother and a father have to make to protect their family." She reached out and placed her perfectly manicured hand over Trevor's arm, squeezing it affectionately. "That is why you are being so incredibly bitter and selfish about this house. You see this property as a dollar amount. Mom and Dad see it as a lifeline to save their grandchildren's future. You cannot take your bank accounts to the grave, Alicia. But I guess since you have no one to leave anything to you, just want to hoard it all for yourself out of pure spite." The psychological warfare was breathtaking in its cruelty. In the African American community, the pressure on women to marry and produce children is a heavy, unspoken burden. To be 35, highly successful, and single is often viewed not as a triumph of independence, but as a tragic failure of femininity. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. She was using the traditional values of our culture to entirely invalidate my worth as a human being. I looked at my mother. Beatrice slowly wiped her mouth with her linen napkin and nodded in solemn agreement. "Your sister is telling the truth, Alicia," she said, her voice entirely devoid of maternal warmth. "A real woman builds a home filled with love. She does not just buy a house and hold the financial receipts over her family's head like a warden. You have sacrificed your entire personal life for corporate greed. We are simply doing what we have to do to ensure Vanessa and Trevor do not lose everything. You should be happy we found a way to handle this without bothering you further." I felt a strange, chilling sensation wash over my entire body. The lingering heartbreak, the desperate desire to save my relationship with my parents, the urge to scream and throw my plate against the wall, it all simply evaporated. It was replaced by a total, absolute emotional detachment. I was looking at four strangers. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. I was nothing more than a malfunctioning automated teller machine that had suddenly decided to stop dispensing cash. They resented my success, they mocked my independence, and they felt entirely justified in stealing from me to fund their own delusions of grandeur. I did not argue. I did not defend my firm, my single status, or my legacy. I simply picked up my fork, cut a small piece of roasted chicken, and took a bite. It tasted like nothing. "You know, Mother," I said smoothly, chewing my food with exaggerated calm. "You raised some very interesting points about legacy and protecting the family. I am sure Friday will be a very educational experience for all of us." Trevor snorted, dismissing my comment entirely as he dug back into his meal. "Yeah, well, just do not expect an invitation to the victory party this weekend. We are going to be busy restructuring our new capital." I offered him a terrifyingly bright smile. "I would not dream of crashing your party, Trevor. I have plenty of corporate paper to push around anyway." I sat there in the dining room for another 20 minutes, silently listening to them map out exactly how they were going to spend my money. They talked about paying off Vanessa's luxury sports utility vehicle, booking a vacation to Aspen to relieve Trevor's stress, and buying a new set of golf clubs. Every arrogant word out of their mouths only cemented my resolve. I was no longer just going to stop the sale. I was going to let them march right up to the very edge of their dreams, and then I was going to push them off the cliff myself. When I finally stood up from that walnut dining table, pushing my custom upholstered chair back, with a deliberate scrape against the hardwood floor, no one tried to stop me. Trevor did not even pause his arrogant monologue about his upcoming Aspen vacation. Vanessa simply smirked, taking another sip of her stolen champagne. But it was not their disrespect that anchored a heavy, freezing weight in my chest. It was the absolute cowardly silence of the two people sitting across from them. I looked down at my father. James kept his eyes firmly locked on his half-eaten plate of food. His shoulders were hunched, his posture entirely defeated. This was the man who used to hold my hand when I was a little girl and tell me that my brilliant mind would change the world. This was the man who had proudly watched me cross the stage to accept my degree. Now he was too terrified of upsetting his fraudulent son-in-law to defend my basic human dignity in the very house I had purchased for him. His silence rang louder in my ears than any insult Trevor could ever throw at me. It was the ultimate act of abandonment. Beatrice was even worse. As I gathered my purse, my mother actually reached across the table and patted Vanessa on the hand, offering her a soft, validating smile. She was silently praising her youngest daughter for putting me in my place. The psychological cut was so deep it bypassed anger entirely and settled into a profound, icy numbness. My own parents were actively participating in my humiliation. They were eagerly validating a white man who was currently draining them dry simply because he represented a societal status they desperately craved. Trevor was a sinking ship, a criminal masquerading as an entrepreneur, and my parents were perfectly willing to drown their own flesh and blood just to keep his fragile ego afloat for a few more days. They had looked at the daughter who paid their bills, built their home, and honored their sacrifices, and they had chosen the man who secretly despised them. I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the formal dining room, down the grand hallway, and out the heavy mahogany front doors into the cool Wednesday night air. The house felt entirely different as I walked down the paved pathway to my car. The sentimental warmth I used to feel for this property was completely gone. It was no longer a home filled with family memories. It was simply an asset, a piece of real estate tied to a legal document currently occupied by 4 hostile strangers. I got into the driver's seat of my car and closed the door, sealing myself in the quiet sanctuary of the leather cabin. I did not cry. The betrayal had burned away the last lingering threads of my daughterly guilt. I pulled out my phone before starting the engine. The emotional detachment was now complete, and the ruthless financial executive inside me took full control. I needed to ensure every single fail-safe was locked in place for Friday morning. I opened my secure work server and drafted a highly confidential message to Malik, my lead forensic accountant. I instructed him to pull the official county lien documents and have them printed on the heaviest, most expensive cardstock we had in the office. I wanted the physical weight of their financial ruin to match the emotional weight of their betrayal. The true beauty of a mechanic and construction lien is its absolute silence. When a property is flagged with this specific type of corporate debt, the county tax assessor does not automatically mail a warning letter to the current residents. The lien simply sits there quietly attached to the property deed, completely invisible, until the title company conducts their mandatory final title search right before the closing signatures are required. My parents and Trevor were operating under the arrogant delusion that the forged quitclaim deed gave them total, unencumbered control of the property. They truly believed they had outsmarted me. They had no idea that the moment they sat down at that polished conference table on Friday, the trap would spring shut with the full, undeniable backing of federal real estate law. I started the engine of my car, the quiet hum of the luxury motor grounding me in the reality of my own hard-earned success. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the custom-built mansion in my rearview mirror. I had given them every possible opportunity to do the right thing. I had given them 48 hours to cancel the sale and save themselves. They chose greed. They chose Trevor. Now I was going to let the law handle the rest. I watched Trevor refill his glass, completely intoxicated by his own fabricated success. I did not say another word. I simply stood up from my chair. When Vanessa paused her conversation to ask where I was going, I offered a tight, polite smile and said I needed to take an urgent client phone call in private. They immediately lost interest, turning right back to their Aspen vacation plans. I walked out of the formal dining room, but I did not go straight to the front door. Instead, I moved silently down the carpeted hallway and slipped into the home office. I closed the solid oak door behind me and turned the heavy brass lock. The sudden silence in the room was absolute, a sharp contrast to the loud, arrogant laughter echoing from the kitchen. I had designed this office specifically for my father. It featured built-in mahogany bookshelves and a massive executive desk. But tonight, it was my command center. I sat down in the leather chair, woke up the desktop computer, and bypassed the basic password I knew my father used. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I navigated directly to the secure portal of the county tax assessor and the state title registry. This was a system I used daily at Sterling Wealth Management, and I knew every single backdoor filing loophole and legal mechanism it possessed. 2 years ago, when I originally purchased the land and funded this house, I had not casually paid the contractors out of my personal checking account. I had funneled every single dollar through a private limited liability company that I exclusively controlled. And before the final coat of paint was even dry, my company had filed a massive mechanic and construction lien against the property address. It was a fail-safe I had created simply to protect the asset from any potential lawsuits my parents might face in their old age. I never imagined I would be using it to protect the asset from my own family. I pulled up the exact parcel identification number for the mansion. The screen populated with the current legal status. There it was. The forged quitclaim deed was proudly sitting at the top of the file, listing James and Beatrice as the sole owners. But right beneath it, buried deeply in the encumbrance tab, was my corporate lien. $550,000, secured by federal real estate law. A property lien is a silent killer. It does not send a text message to the current residents. It does not mail a warning postcard. It simply waits in the digital archives until a property is about to change hands. But I was not going to leave anything to chance. I needed to ensure the title company handling Friday's closing could not possibly overlook it during their final audit. I opened the digital flagging system and officially linked my corporate lien directly to the active escrow file the buyer's real estate agent had just opened. I attached a formal notice of intent to collect. I typed in the exact routing numbers for my corporate holding account. By doing this, I legally mandated that the moment the cash buyer wired the $650,000 to the title company, the automated escrow software would immediately intercept the funds. The software would read the lien, freeze the seller payout, and instantly route the first $550,000 directly back into my bank account. Trevor and my parents would not even have the opportunity to see the money, let alone touch it. The remaining funds would be instantly devoured by realtor commissions, closing costs, and the back taxes my parents had clearly been ignoring. They were going to walk away with absolutely nothing. Through the thick walls of the house, I could hear another sudden burst of laughter from the dining room. Trevor was probably making a toast to his own brilliance. Trevor thought he was a visionary. He thought building a legacy meant talking loudly and wearing expensive clothes. But real power does not need to shout. Real power is a few keystrokes in a county database that legally strips a man of everything he thinks he owns. I sat in the dark, illuminated only by the glow of the computer monitor, and pressed the enter key. The screen flashed green. Status updated. The legal trap was now permanently locked into the county grid. It was completely irreversible by anyone except me. I cleared the browser history, shut down the computer, and stood up from the desk. I unlocked the office door and walked quietly down the hallway, bypassing the dining room entirely. I let myself out the front door and walked to my car. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. The emotional turmoil of the past few days had completely vanished, replaced by a deep, satisfying anticipation. Friday was no longer a deadline to fear. It was a day of reckoning. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity that settled over the Atlanta skyline. I walked into the sleek glass-walled offices of Sterling Wealth Management 2 hours before my first scheduled client meeting. The bullpen was still quiet, the rows of empty desks bathed in the pale morning light. I walked straight to my corner office, my heels sinking into the plush carpet, and found Malik already sitting at my conference table. He did not offer a polite good morning. He did not ask how my family dinner went the night before. He simply pushed a thick, heavily bound black folder across the polished mahogany table toward me. "You were entirely right to trust your instincts on this guy." Malik said, his voice unusually grim. He took a sip of his black coffee, his eyes dark with lack of sleep. "Trevor is not just an incompetent businessman, Alicia. He is a criminal." I sat down slowly, the soft leather of my chair creaking in the silent room. I pulled the black folder toward me and flipped open the heavy cover. The first page was a complex organizational chart Malik had built, detailing a web of shell corporations offshore, holding accounts and dummy vendor contracts. It was the kind of financial labyrinth I usually only saw when auditing corrupt hedge fund managers. "Walk me through it," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Malik leaned forward, pointing a pen at the center of the chart. "Trevor's boutique marketing agency, Vanguard Solutions, has not turned a legitimate profit in over 2 years. He lost his 3 biggest accounts 18 months ago because he failed to deliver on basic advertising campaigns. But instead of downsizing his operations or cutting back on his extravagant personal lifestyle, he decided to start running a shell game." I stared at the numbers printed on the page. The sheer volume of cash flowing out of his corporate accounts into personal luxury expenses was staggering. There were charges for the leased sports cars, the designer suits, the lavish vacations, and massive country club membership fees. He was bleeding money to maintain the illusion of success. How was he covering the deficit, I asked, tracing a red line connecting his agency to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. "He was commingling funds," Malik explained, his tone laced with professional disgust. "6 months ago, Trevor managed to land a massive regional healthcare provider as a new client. They wired him a massive upfront retainer meant to secure regional television spots and billboard space for an entire year. Instead of putting that money into an escrow account to pay the advertising vendors, Trevor diverted it. He created fake invoices from non-existent media companies and funneled the healthcare providers' money directly into his own pockets to pay off his mounting personal debts." A cold chill washed over my arms. He embezzled from his own clients. Not just one client, Malik corrected, flipping to the next page of the dossier. Once he started, he could not stop. He used the retainer from a second client to cover the missing funds from the first, running a textbook Ponzi scheme just to keep the lights on. But the house of cards collapsed 3 weeks ago. The healthcare provider ordered a routine quarterly audit of their advertising expenditures. Their internal accounting team realized that none of the television spots they paid for had actually aired. They demanded a full reconciliation of the vendor accounts. I leaned back in my chair, the reality of Trevor's arrogance finally snapping into sharp focus. He had sat at my dining room table just 12 hours ago, swirling my expensive champagne and lecturing me about the harsh realities of the modern market. He had the absolute audacity to mock my corporate career and attribute my hard-earned success to diversity quotas, all while he was actively running a fraudulent criminal enterprise. He was not a visionary. He was a thief in a tailored suit. Did the healthcare company go to the authorities? I asked, my mind racing, to calculate the legal fallout. "Not yet," Malik said, tapping a highly confidential legal document he had managed to extract from a private server. "The healthcare provider is preparing for a massive public merger next quarter. A scandal involving a fraudulent marketing firm losing $500,000 of their capital would tank their stock price and cause a panic among their shareholders. They want this handled quietly. So, their legal team issued a private demand letter to Trevor. Malik slid the document across the table. I looked at the bold, aggressive legal letterhead. It was a formal notice of intent to pursue federal wire fraud and embezzlement charges, unless full restitution was made immediately. They gave him a deadline, Malik said softly. They demanded the return of the stolen funds, plus a massive penalty for breach of contract and legal fees. If the money is not wired into their corporate account by the last day of this month, they are handing the entire dossier over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I scanned the bottom of the demand letter, my eyes locking onto the final settlement figure. My breath caught in my throat. The total demand was exactly $635,000. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. The all-cash offer on the custom mansion I built for my parents was $650,000. The numbers aligned perfectly. Trevor did not need an injection of capital to save a struggling business. He needed a massive, untraceable lump sum of cash to quietly pay off a corporate extortion demand and keep himself out of a federal penitentiary. The extra $15,000 would perfectly cover his immediate personal legal fees. "My parents are not saving his business," I whispered, staring blindly at the terrifying numbers. "They are buying him out of a felony." Malik nodded slowly. "Trevor is using your family as a human shield. He knows he is going down, so he manipulated your mother into liquidating her most valuable asset to save his own skin. And the worst part is, if your parents use a forged real estate document to secure the funds, and those funds are subsequently used to pay off a criminal restitution, your parents could potentially be indicted as accessories after the fact in a federal money laundering investigation." The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. Beatrice and James were arrogant, cruel, and deeply misguided in their favoritism toward my sister. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but they were not hardened criminals. They were simply ignorant, desperate parents, blinded by their desperate need to maintain their social standing. Trevor was perfectly willing to let two elderly people risk federal prison time just to cover up his own spectacular failures. I closed the heavy black folder, my hands trembling with a mixture of raw fury and absolute clarity. The emotional detachment I had felt last night at the dinner table hardened into an impenetrable armor of steel. I was no longer just protecting my financial assets from a greedy family. I was actively dismantling a parasite who was going to drag my entire bloodline into a federal courtroom. "Does Vanessa know?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. Malik sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I cannot prove what she knows and what she does not. But considering the cars are in her name and she is listed as the vice president of Vanguard Solutions on paper, if the FBI gets involved, she is going down right alongside him." I stood up from the conference table, grabbing the black folder and tucking it under my arm. My sister had spent my entire life looking down on me, weaponizing my independence and mocking my career. She had sat in my house last night and told me I did not understand how to protect a family. It was time to find out exactly how far her loyalty to this fraudulent white visionary truly extended. "Lock down the corporate lien, Malik," I ordered, walking toward my office door. "Ensure the title company receives the automated flag the second the escrow account opens tomorrow morning. Do not let a single cent slip through the cracks." "Where are you going?" Malik called out behind me. "I am going to pay my sister a surprise visit," I replied, not looking back. "I need to know if she is a victim or a co-conspirator." I drove straight from my downtown office to the upscale gated community where Vanessa and Trevor lived. The neighborhood was a sprawling display of new money filled with massive modern farmhouses and perfectly manicured lawns. As I pulled up to their driveway, I saw the two leased luxury sports utility vehicles sitting proudly in the sun. Everything about their life was a carefully constructed, incredibly expensive lie. I grabbed the heavy black folder from my passenger seat, slammed the car door, and marched up to their front porch. I rang the doorbell twice and waited. A moment later, the door swung open. Vanessa stood there wearing designer silk loungewear, holding a matching ceramic coffee mug. When she saw me standing on her welcome mat, her face instantly twisted into a mask of deep annoyance. Alicia, what are you doing here? She sighed, shifting her weight defensively. If you came to lecture me about the house again, you are wasting your breath. I have a lot of packing to do for Aspen, and I do not have time for your corporate high horse routine. I did not wait for an invitation. I pushed past her, stepping right into her vaulted entryway. Excuse me, Vanessa yelled, slamming the front door shut and following me into her lavishly decorated living room. You cannot just barge into my home. I stopped in front of her expensive glass coffee table and slammed the thick black folder down onto the surface. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the pristine room. I turned around to face my sister. The anger I had felt the night before was completely gone, replaced by a cold, clinical dread. Your husband is not a struggling entrepreneur, Vanessa, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady register. He is a criminal. He is currently under investigation for federal wire fraud and embezzlement. Vanessa froze. She stared at the black folder on her table, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around her coffee mug. But she did not gasp. She did not cover her mouth in horror. She simply stared at the documents, her breathing growing shallow. Open it, I demanded, pointing at the folder. Look at the bank records. Trevor stole $635,000 from a regional healthcare provider. He took their advertising retainer and funneled it directly into his personal accounts to pay for these cars, this house, and your designer clothes. The company caught him. They issued a formal demand letter. If that money is not returned by the end of the month, they are handing the entire case over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I stepped closer to her, desperate to see a shred of sisterly decency break through her arrogant facade. They are not using the house money to save his business, Vanessa. He is using our parents to buy himself out of a federal indictment. For a split second, the room was absolutely silent. I waited for the tears. I waited for her world to shatter. Instead, Vanessa lunged forward. Her hand cracked across my left cheek with blinding force. The slap was so hard it snapped my head to the side, leaving a ringing sound in my left ear. The sudden, violent physical assault sent a shockwave through my entire body. I stumbled back a step, raising a trembling hand to my face. My skin burned fiercely where her rings had scraped my cheek. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. Vanessa was standing with her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a feral, unhinged fury. She did not look like a woman whose world had just been destroyed. She looked like a cornered animal lashing out at a threat. Do not you ever come into my house and disrespect my husband? Vanessa hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. You already knew, I whispered, the horrifying realization washing over me like ice water. I stared at my younger sister, suddenly seeing a complete stranger. You knew he stole that money. Of course I knew, Vanessa screamed, completely abandoning her polished country club persona. Trevor tells me everything. We are a team. You would not understand that because nobody has ever loved you enough to share a life with you. He was under immense pressure, Alicia. The market shifted. His investors backed out. He just needed to borrow that capital to keep the agency afloat until the next quarter. It was an accounting error, not a crime. The healthcare company is just being vicious because they want to ruin a successful man. An accounting error, I repeated, utterly disgusted by her delusion. He ran a Ponzi scheme. He spent their money on your luxury vacations, and now you are letting our mother commit felony real estate fraud to cover up his crimes. If the authorities trace that $650,000 back to Beatrice, she is going to be indicted for money laundering. You are going to send our mother to prison to save your fraudulent husband. Mom and Dad are helping us because they actually believe in family. Vanessa snapped back, stepping right into my personal space. They want to protect our legacy. Trevor is going to pay them back with interest the second his next big contract lands. The only person trying to destroy this family is you. You have millions of dollars sitting in your accounts, Alicia. You could have written us a check and made all of this go away, but instead you forced our parents to sell a house just so you could feel superior to us. You are greedy, you are bitter, and I will not let my husband go to jail just because you want to play the victim. I stood there listening to the golden child completely justify the destruction of our parents' lives. She was entirely complicit. She was actively participating in the cover-up. The last lingering shred of guilt I had about destroying them at the closing table vanished entirely. My sister was not a victim of a manipulative man, she was his willing accomplice. "Get out of my house," Vanessa commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the front door. "Get out right now. You are going to stay away from the title company tomorrow, and you are going to let the sale proceed. If you try to stop that wire transfer, I swear to God, Alicia, you will never see any of us ever again. You will be dead to this family." I did not argue with her. There was absolutely no point in reasoning with someone who had completely detached from reality. I slowly lowered my hand from my stinging cheek. I looked at her expensive silk clothes, her massive engagement ring, and the beautiful house surrounding us. I knew with absolute certainty that by this time next month, all of it would be gone. "Keep the folder." "Vanessa," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of all emotion, "you are going to need those financial records when you are sitting in a room with a federal defense attorney." I turned around and walked out of the living room. I did not look back as I pulled the heavy front door open and stepped out into the humid morning air. I walked down the driveway to my car, my mind razor-sharp and entirely focused. The line in the sand had been drawn. My sister had chosen her side. There was only one thing left to do before the closing table. I needed to look my parents in the eye one final time. The drive from Vanessa's sprawling modern farmhouse to the quiet suburban neighborhood where my parents lived took exactly 30 minutes. It felt like a funeral procession. The stinging red mark on my left cheek was a physical reminder that the sister I grew up with was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, violent accomplice to a federal crime. I had the heavy black folder sitting on the passenger seat next to me. It contained the absolute truth. It contained the financial records, the demand letter, and the undeniable proof that Trevor was an embezzler facing federal prison time. I pulled my car to the curb in front of the custom-built mansion. The mid-morning sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the pristine landscaping I had paid a professional crew to install just last spring. Everything looked so incredibly peaceful. My father James was standing on the wraparound porch, slowly sweeping the pristine wooden deck. My mother Beatrice was kneeling in the front garden wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and carefully pruning her prized rose bushes. They looked like the perfect picture of an idyllic, happy retirement. I grabbed the black folder, stepped out of my luxury sedan, and walked up the paved driveway. My heels clicked loudly against the stone, shattering the quiet suburban illusion. James stopped sweeping the moment he saw me. He leaned heavily on his broom handle, his eyes darting nervously toward the street, as if he expected me to be flanked by police officers. Beatrice paused her pruning shears and stood up, brushing the dirt from her gardening gloves. She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, clearly annoyed that I had returned to disrupt her morning. I did not stop to admire the roses. I walked straight up the wooden steps onto the porch and dropped the heavy black folder onto the wrought iron patio table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice completely devoid of the anger or desperation I had shown on Monday. I was operating with cold surgical precision. Beatrice walked up the porch steps, taking off her sun hat and glaring at me. "I thought we made ourselves perfectly clear at dinner last night, Alicia. We are not discussing this house with you anymore. The paperwork is done. The closing is tomorrow morning. You need to accept that and move on with your life." I ignored her arrogant tone and opened the black folder. "I am not here to talk about the house, Mother," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I am here to talk about your son-in-law." I pulled out the demand letter from the regional healthcare provider and slid it across the glass surface of the patio table. I laid the bank statements and the corporate wire transfers right next to it. "Trevor is not a visionary entrepreneur," I stated, clearly refusing to let her look away. "His boutique marketing agency is a massive fraud. He has been embezzling money from his clients to pay for his designer clothes, his leased sports cars, and his country club memberships. He stole $635,000 from a massive corporate account. They caught him." That letter right there is a formal demand for restitution. If he does not pay back every single cent by the end of this month, they are handing his entire file over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. James let out a sharp, breathless gasp. He dropped his broom. The wooden handle clattered loudly against the porch deck. He stared at the documents on the table, his hands shaking violently. "Wire fraud," my father whispered, the sheer terror finally breaking through his cowardice. "He is going to federal prison. He is dragging you down with him, Dad," I said, turning my attention to the man who was supposed to protect me. "They do not need the money to save a failing business. Trevor needs a massive, untraceable lump sum of cash to quietly pay off his extortion demand before he is indicted. And he convinced you to commit real estate fraud to get it for him." I turned back to my mother. She was staring at the demand letter, her jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in her cheek. "If you sit down at that closing table tomorrow morning," I explained, laying out the brutal legal reality of her actions, "and you sell this house using a forged quitclaim deed, you are committing a felony." But it gets much worse. When you hand that $650,000 over to Trevor and he uses it to pay off his stolen corporate funds, the federal investigators will inevitably trace the money right back to this property sale. You will be indicted for money laundering and conspiracy. You are risking your freedom, your retirement, and your very lives to cover up a crime you did not even commit. The silence on the porch was deafening. The only sound was the gentle rustling of the oak trees in the front yard. I had laid all my cards on the table. I had given them the absolute truth. I was offering them a life raft before the ship completely sank. "I am giving you one final choice," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, offering them one last shred of daughterly grace. "Cancel the sale today. Call the title company right now and pull the plug. If you do this, I will tear up the fraud report I drafted against you. I will let you live in this house for the rest of your lives. I will completely walk away. But Trevor must face his own consequences. You cannot use my assets to fund a criminal payoff. Choose yourselves. Choose the daughter who actually built this roof over your head." I waited. I watched my father look at the documents, tears streaming down his face. I prayed he would step forward, grab the phone, and end this madness. But James just covered his face with his trembling hands and backed away, leaning against the siding of the house. He was entirely broken, completely incapable of making a hard decision. Beatrice, however, did not cry. She did not break down in fear. She slowly reached out, picked up the demand letter, and stared at it for a long, agonizing moment. Then she dropped it back onto the table. "These are just pieces of paper," Alicia Beatrice said, her voice dripping with a terrifying, delusional calm. "Anyone with enough money and a fancy computer could print these out. You have always been jealous of Vanessa. You have always hated Trevor because he is a successful man with a real family, while you have absolutely nothing. I do not believe a single word of this." I stared at her, completely stunned by the depth of her denial. "You think I forged federal demand letters just to spite you? I think you are a bitter, selfish woman who will do anything to keep your sister from being happy." My mother snapped, her eyes narrowing with raw hatred. "Trevor is under pressure. He made a few accounting mistakes. That does not make him a criminal. It makes him a human being. A real family protects each other when things get tough. We are not abandoning Vanessa just because you printed out some fake bank statements to scare us." She stepped closer to me, entirely invading my personal space. The matriarch who had raised me was completely gone. In her place was a woman who had tied her entire social identity to a fraudulent white man, and she was willing to burn down her own life just to keep the illusion alive. "We are going to the title company tomorrow morning," Beatrice stated coldly, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "We are selling this house. We are giving the money to your sister. And if you try to stop this closing tomorrow, if you try to ruin your sister's life with your petty jealousy, you are dead to us. Do not ever call me your mother again." I looked deep into her eyes. There was no hesitation. There was no love. There was only absolute, unwavering resentment. She had made her choice. I slowly reached down, gathered the documents, and placed them back inside the black folder. I did not argue. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. The emotional detachment was complete. They had officially released me from every single moral obligation I had ever felt toward them. I tucked the folder under my arm and looked at my mother one last time. "Message received," I said calmly. I turned my back on them and walked down the porch steps. I walked down the driveway, got into my car, and started the engine. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. I drove back toward the city skyline entirely liberated. They had chosen their path. Tomorrow morning at the closing table, I was going to let them walk right into the devastating trap they had insisted on springing. Friday morning arrived with clear blue skies and an unforgiving brightness that matched the cold clarity in my mind. I walked into the sleek, modern lobby of the downtown Atlanta title agency, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. Waiting for me near the elevators were Lawrence, my senior real estate attorney, and Malik, my lead forensic accountant. They were both dressed in immaculate dark suits carrying heavy leather briefcases that contained the absolute destruction of my family's financial future. We did not exchange pleasantries. We simply stepped into the elevator and rode up to the 14th floor in absolute focused silence. The receptionist directed us down a long corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass walls. As we approached the main executive conference room at the end of the hall, I held up my hand, signaling Lawrence and Malik to stop. I stood just out of sight looking through the tinted glass panels. I wanted to watch them before their grand illusion completely shattered. The setup inside the room was sickeningly perfect. My parents, Vanessa and Trevor, were gathered around a massive mahogany conference table. Sitting opposite them was the cash buyer, an older gentleman in a golf polo who looked eager to close the deal and secure his new investment. The title agent, a young woman wearing thick glasses, was carefully organizing a massive stack of heavily tabbed closing folders, preparing the final signature pages. Trevor was completely in his element. He was wearing a brand new custom-tailored charcoal suit that he had undoubtedly purchased with stolen funds. He leaned comfortably across the table, flashing his bright, white smile, aggressively chatting up the buyer. Even through the thick glass, I could read his arrogant body language. He was holding his hands apart, making grand gestures, loudly bragging about his next big investment venture. He was spinning a fabricated, grandiose tale about how he was liquidating some minor family real estate assets to fund a massive national expansion of his boutique marketing firm. The buyer was nodding along respectfully, completely unaware that he was sitting across from a desperate embezzler who was only days away from a federal indictment. Vanessa sat right beside Trevor, beaming with unearned pride. She was wearing an expensive silk blouse and her largest diamond earrings, playing the role of the supportive, wealthy entrepreneur wife to absolute perfection. She kept reaching over to touch Trevor's arm, validating every single lie that fell out of his mouth. Then I looked at my parents. James was sitting rigidly in his leather chair, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He looked pale, exhausted, and deeply uncomfortable. He was staring at the thick stack of closing documents as if they were a live bomb. He knew exactly what Trevor was hiding, and he knew exactly what my mother had done to get them to this table, but he was choosing to swallow his fear and stay silent. Beatrice, however, looked incredibly triumphant. She sat tall, her chin lifted proudly, watching the title agent prepare the final transfer papers. She looked like a woman who believed she had just outsmarted the entire world. She had successfully stolen my house, protected her golden child, and secured her social standing in the community, all without showing a single drop of remorse. Watching them practically salivate over the money they were about to steal from me erased any lingering hesitation I might have harbored. They were not victims of circumstance. They were eager, willing participants in a massive fraud. I turned to Lawrence, and Malik gave them a single sharp nod and stepped out from behind the wall. I pushed the heavy glass doors of the conference room open. The heavy hinges let out a low groan that cut sharply through the cheerful chatter inside the room. I walked in, my posture rigid and my expression carved from pure ice. Lawrence flanked my right side and Malik flanked my left. We moved together as a single intimidating wall of corporate authority. The room went dead silent. The transformation in the atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. Trevor stopped speaking mid-sentence, his grand hand gesture freezing in the empty air. The confident, arrogant smile slid right off his face, replaced by a deep defensive scowl. The cash buyer looked up in confusion, shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair as he sensed the sudden hostility. The title agent paused, her pen hovering just inches above the final signature line on the deed transfer. James let out a quiet, choked gasp and physically shrank back into his chair, entirely unable to meet my eyes. Vanessa shot up from her seat, her face flushing with instant venomous anger. But it was Beatrice who reacted first. My mother leaned forward, her hands slamming flat against the polished mahogany table. "I told you not to come!" she hissed across the room, her voice vibrating with raw hatred. "You have absolutely no business being here, Alicia. Get out right now." I did not stop walking until I reached the head of the table. I looked down at my mother, entirely unbothered by her rage. "I have every right to be here, Beatrice," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, which only seemed to enrage her more. "Who are these people?" the cash buyer asked, looking nervously from me to the title agent. "Is there a problem with the closing?" Trevor quickly stood up, desperately trying to salvage his illusion of control. He let out a loud, forced laugh and waved his hand dismissively in my direction. "There is no problem at all," he assured the buyer, smoothly turning on his practiced salesman charm. "This is just my estranged sister-in-law. She has a history of being highly dramatic and mentally unstable. She is just upset that the family decided to sell the property without consulting her. Please ignore her. Let us just get these documents signed and finish our business." He turned to the title agent, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register. "Call building security and have this woman removed from the premises immediately. We are in the middle of a private legal transaction." The title agent reached nervously for the desk phone on the console, but Lawrence stepped forward, placing his heavy leather briefcase directly onto the center of the polished table with a loud thud. "I would highly advise against touching that phone," Lawrence said, his voice echoing with deep, intimidating legal authority. "And I would strongly advise against signing a single piece of paper on that table. My name is Lawrence Sterling. I am the Senior Real Estate Counsel for Sterling Wealth Management. And the woman you just threatened to have removed by security is the sole legal director of the corporate entity that built, financed, and currently holds a massive lien against this exact property." The color instantly drained from the title agent's face. She pulled her hand away from the phone as if the plastic had burned her. "A lien," she stammered frantically, looking down at her thick stack of escrow paperwork. "That is impossible. I ran a clear title search yesterday morning. The quitclaim deed filed by the sellers showed absolute free and clear ownership, a forged quitclaim deed." I corrected smoothly, pulling out a heavy leather chair and sitting down directly across from Trevor. Trevor stared at me, his eyes wide with a sudden creeping panic. The arrogant posture he had maintained all week was beginning to crumble. Vanessa slammed both of her hands on the table. "You are lying!" she screamed, completely losing her polished country club composure. "Mom and Dad own this house. You have nothing to do with it. You are just trying to ruin Trevor's business deal because you are a jealous, bitter spinster who wants everyone else to be as miserable as you are." I did not even look at my sister. I kept my eyes entirely locked on Trevor, watching the terrible, suffocating realization slowly dawn on his face. He was not just dealing with a bitter family member anymore. He was sitting across from a corporate executive who had just brought a senior attorney and a forensic auditor to his closing table. The walls of his carefully constructed fraud were rapidly closing in, and there was absolutely no way out. Malik opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of heavy cardstock documents, and slid them straight down the center of the table. They stopped right in front of the paralyzed title agent. "Check the county portal again," Malik instructed, his voice cold and precise. The automated flag was activated the moment you opened the escrow file this morning. The title agent pushed her thick glasses up the bridge of her nose, her hands shaking visibly as she pulled her keyboard closer. The rhythmic clacking of her typing echoed loudly in the dead silence of the conference room. Everyone watched her monitor. A few seconds later, the screen flashed with a bright red notification banner. All the color instantly drained from the young woman's face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. She slowly turned her monitor around so the entire table could see the glowing red text. "There is a block on the escrow account," the title agent stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked terrified to even deliver the news. "It is an automated legal hold. A mechanic and construction lien was filed against the property address 24 months ago." Trevor slammed his fist onto the table, making the crystal water pitchers rattle. "That is impossible," he shouted, pointing an aggressive finger at the agent. "You ran a clear title search yesterday. You told us the deed was clean. Fix your system right now." I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink. I simply reached into the open leather briefcase Malik was holding and extracted a single thick document printed on heavy cardstock. It was stamped with the official raised seal of the county clerk. I placed it flat against the polished mahogany wood and slid it smoothly down the center of the table. It glided past my mother, past my father, and stopped directly in front of Trevor. "The system is not broken, Trevor," I said, leaning back in my plush leather chair and steepling my fingers. "The title agent ran a search on the land deed, and she is absolutely correct. The land deed is currently registered to James and Beatrice, courtesy of a highly illegal forgery orchestrated by my mother." Beatrice flinched as if I had physically struck her, her eyes darting nervously toward the cash buyer. "But you made a massive, arrogant miscalculation," I continued, my voice cold and echoing with absolute authority. "You assumed the dirt and the house were the same legal entity. They are not. 2 years ago, when I purchased that land, I did not write a personal check to the construction company. I hired a private limited liability company to pour the foundation frame, the walls, install the roof, and finish the interior. That company funded the entire $550,000 build. And before my mother ever forged that quitclaim deed, that company legally placed a construction lien on the physical structure to secure its investment." Trevor stared at the heavy cardstock document sitting in front of him. His breathing was growing erratic. "What company?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Sterling Property Holdings," Lawrence interjected smoothly from my right side. "A private corporate entity wherein my client Alicia sits as the sole managing director. Your mother forged a document to steal the land, but Alicia owns the house sitting on top of it. And federal real estate law dictates that the creator of a physical structure holds the ultimate senior debt." Vanessa grabbed the document, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the thick paper. She scanned the legal jargon, her eyes wide and frantic. "This is a trick," she screamed, throwing the paper back onto the table. "You cannot do this. Mom and Dad are the sellers. They have the right to the money." The title agent cleared her throat nervously, adjusting her glasses again. "Actually, she has every right to do this," the agent explained, her professional tone returning as she relied on the law to shield her from the family explosion. "A senior construction lien does not prevent the sale of a property. The transaction can absolutely proceed today." Trevor let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He slumped back into his chair, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Oh, thank God," he muttered. "See? I told you she was just trying to cause a scene. Process the paperwork and let us get out of here. But you do not understand how a lien works." The title agent interrupted, her voice dropping a full octave with grim finality. "The property can be sold, but the debt must be legally satisfied before any profits are distributed to the sellers." Trevor froze, his eyes locked onto the title agent, a look of pure, unadulterated terror washing over his face. "Let me break down the math for you, Trevor, since your own accounting skills have clearly landed you in federal trouble," I said smoothly. "The cash buyer sitting across from you has agreed to pay $650,000 for the property. The moment he wires that money into the escrow account, the automated system you just saw will instantly trigger. By law, the first $550,000 will be immediately routed directly into my corporate holding account to satisfy the lien. I paused, letting the devastating number hang in the air. That leaves exactly $100,000 remaining in the escrow account, I continued. From that 100,000, the automated system will deduct Jason's 6% realtor commission. Then it will deduct the title company processing fees. Finally, it will automatically seize the 2 years of unpaid back property taxes that James and Beatrice conveniently ignored while they were busy plotting against me. I leaned forward, locking my eyes entirely onto Trevor's pale, sweating face. Do you know what the net payout to the sellers is after those deductions, Trevor? It is zero. In fact, my parents might actually owe the county a few $1,000s when this is all said and done. You are going to sign those closing documents today, sell the house, and walk out of this lobby with absolutely nothing. The illusion shattered completely. The arrogant, wealthy, visionary persona Trevor had maintained for years disintegrated right in front of my eyes. He looked down at his trembling hands, the devastating reality of his situation finally crushing him. He needed $635,000 by the end of the month to pay off the extortion demand from the healthcare provider he had embezzled from. He had banked his entire freedom on this forged real estate deal. Now the money was entirely out of his reach. He was going to federal prison, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. Vanessa began to hyperventilate. She grabbed Trevor's arm, shaking him violently. "Tell her she is lying, Trevor." She begged, her voice shrill and panicked. "Tell her we are getting the money. We need that money for Aspen. We need to pay the house note." Trevor violently ripped his arm away from her grasp. "Shut up, Vanessa!" he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Just shut your mouth." My mother Beatrice stared at me in absolute horror. The triumphant smirk she had worn just 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. She realized in that exact moment that she had committed a federal felony, alienated her eldest daughter, and risked her entire retirement, all for a payout that did not even exist. She had burned her life to the ground for absolutely no reason. The older gentleman in the golf polo, the cash buyer, had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, absorbing the entire chaotic scene. He looked at the forged documents. He looked at Trevor's unhinged rage. He looked at the screaming sister and the terrified parents. Then he calmly stood up. He reached across the table, picked up his leather portfolio, and zipped it shut with a loud, decisive sound. "I am a real estate investor," the buyer said, his voice entirely calm but laced with profound disgust. "I buy clean properties. I do not buy crime scenes." "Wait, please," James begged, speaking up for the very first time. My father stood up, his knees shaking, holding his hands out toward the buyer in a pathetic display of desperation. "We can figure this out. The house is beautiful. You saw the neighborhood. I heard this young woman mention forged quitclaim deeds, embezzled corporate funds, and federal prison?" The buyer replied, shaking his head and stepping away from the table. "I do not care how beautiful the crown molding is. This entire transaction is a massive legal liability. If the federal authorities seize this asset during a fraud investigation, my cash gets locked in a government vault for years. I am pulling my offer. The deal is officially dead." He did not wait for an apology or an explanation. He turned around, pushed the heavy glass doors open, and walked out of the conference room without a single backward glance. The heavy thud of the glass doors closing behind him sounded like a judge dropping a final gavel. The silence that followed was suffocating. Trevor suddenly let out an animalistic scream of pure rage. He grabbed the thick stack of escrow documents and violently swept his arm across the mahogany table. Papers, pens, and crystal water glasses went flying into the air, crashing against the walls and shattering onto the marble floor. The title agent shrieked and ducked behind her chair for cover. "You ruined me!" Trevor screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me, his face twisted in a mask of pure hatred. His polished mask was completely gone, revealing the entitled, deeply racist monster hiding underneath. "You and your worthless, incompetent family. You dragged me down with you. Vanessa burst into hysterical tears, covering her face with her hands. Beatrice sank back into her chair, clutching her chest, her breathing shallow and rapid. James just stood there looking at the shattered glass on the floor, the perfect visual representation of the family he had failed to protect. I stood up slowly, completely untouched by their panic. I buttoned my suit jacket, looked at the ruins of their greed, and felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating peace. The shattered glass from the water pitchers lay sparkling across the polished marble floor of the conference room, a perfect reflection of the absolute destruction Trevor had just brought upon himself. He stood at the head of the mahogany table, his chest heaving under his tailored charcoal suit, his face flushed with a terrifying, unhinged panic. The door had long since closed behind the cash buyer, but Trevor remained completely paralyzed by the reality of what that departure meant. The $650,000 he needed to avoid a federal prison sentence was gone. The grand illusion he had spent years meticulously crafting had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the room was Trevor taking short, ragged breaths. Then he slowly turned his head to look at my sister. Vanessa was still sitting in her chair, tears spilling over her perfectly applied makeup. She reached a trembling hand out toward him. "Trevor," she whimpered, her voice high and tight with fear. "Babe, please calm down. We can call the bank. We can ask your investors for an extension. We will figure this out together." Trevor looked at her outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake. He violently slapped it away. "Do not touch me!" he roared, his voice echoing off the soundproof glass walls with such ferocity that both my mother and the title agent physically recoiled. "Figure it out together." "Are you actually that stupid, Vanessa? There are no investors, there is no bank extension. I am facing a federal indictment because your absolutely incompetent, worthless family could not even manage to sell a simple piece of real estate properly." "Trevor, my father!" James suddenly spoke up, his voice shaking but laced with a desperate need to protect his youngest daughter. "Do not speak to your wife that way. We did everything we could to help you." Trevor spun around, directing his absolute fury toward my father. "You did nothing." He spat, his upper lip curling in profound disgust. "You are a weak, pathetic old man who let his wife commit a felony because you were too much of a coward to manage your own household. I came to you people for one simple transaction. I needed a cash injection, and you promised me a clear title. Instead, you drag me into this trap because you are too ignorant to understand how a corporate lien works." He began to pace aggressively back and forth across the front of the room, running his hands through his perfectly styled blonde hair, pulling at the roots. The polished, sophisticated entrepreneur was completely gone. In his place was a cornered, desperate criminal, and his mask was slipping entirely, revealing the deeply ingrained racism and entitlement he had been harboring since the day he met my sister. "I lowered myself to marry into this family," Trevor shouted, pacing faster, his eyes blazing with a vicious, hateful superiority. "I thought I was making a smart move. I thought you people would be so incredibly grateful to have a successful white man validate your desperate little suburban lives that you would just hand over whatever financial support I needed. You parade around your custom house and your country club memberships pretending you are sophisticated, but you are nothing but a bunch of uneducated ghetto trash masquerading as old money." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Vanessa let out a sharp, devastated sob, covering her mouth with both hands. My father slumped back into his chair as if he had been shot. Beatrice stared at Trevor in absolute horror, her eyes wide, her jaw completely slack. This was the man she had stolen for. This was the visionary she had forged my name to protect. This was the son-in-law she had actively chosen over her own flesh and blood, simply because he represented a social status she desperately wanted to claim. "You are all entirely useless," Trevor continued his tirade, pointing a shaking finger directly at Beatrice. "You think you are some grand matriarch, Beatrice. You are a joke. You committed federal fraud because you are a desperate social climber who could not bear the thought of her country club friends finding out her daughter married a broke man. And now you have dragged me down into your miserable, incompetent drama." He stopped pacing and looked at Vanessa, who was openly weeping at the table. "I am calling my attorney the second I leave this building," he snarled at her, completely devoid of any affection or humanity. "And do not even think about coming back to the house. I am not going to let your criminal family drag my name through the mud any further. We are done." Trevor did not look at me. He did not dare look at the one person in the room who had actually bested him. He simply grabbed his leather briefcase off the floor, kicked a shard of broken glass out of his way, and stormed out of the conference room. He pushed through the heavy doors and disappeared down the hallway, leaving my family sitting in the absolute ruins of his vile hatred. Vanessa completely broke down. The golden child, the sister who had sat in my dining room just 2 nights ago and mocked my single status, completely collapsed over the mahogany table. She buried her face in her arms, her shoulders shaking violently as deep guttural sobs tore through her chest. Her husband had not just abandoned her. He had exposed the horrifying truth that he had never loved her at all. He had only viewed her as a convenient mark, a naive girl with a wealthy family he could exploit. She lifted her head, her face stained with mascara and tears, and looked directly at me. "Alicia," she begged, her voice raw and breathless. "Alicia, please. You have to stop this. You have to release the lien. If he gets that money, he will come back. He is just stressed. He did not mean those things. Please, I am begging you. I will lose my marriage. I will lose my home. I will have absolutely nothing." I looked at my younger sister, feeling no triumph, only a profound, chilling pity. She was so deeply indoctrinated by her own delusions that she was actually begging me to fund the man who had just verbally decimated our entire bloodline. She was willing to endure his racial abuse and his financial manipulation just to keep the title of a married woman. Before I could respond to her pathetic pleading, my mother suddenly stood up. Beatrice placed both of her hands flat on the table, her knuckles turning white. Her face was pale, but she desperately tried to summon the old, iron-clad authority she had used to control me for 35 years. "Alicia, that is enough." Beatrice commanded, her voice trembling, but demanding obedience. "You have made your point. You embarrassed him and you terrified your sister. Now you are going to log into that computer system and release the funds. You are destroying your sister's life, and I will not allow it. Fix this right now." I slowly stood up from my plush leather chair. I buttoned my tailored suit jacket, my movements entirely calm and deliberate. I looked at the three of them. My father was staring at the floor in absolute shame. My sister was weeping uncontrollably. And my mother was still trying to act like the warden of a prison she no longer controlled. The power dynamic in the room had permanently, irreversibly shifted. I looked my mother dead in the eye, stripping away every ounce of daughterly deference I had ever held for her. "You forged my name to steal from me," I said, my voice cold, steady, and echoing with absolute finality. "You committed a federal felony to fund a white man who just looked you in the face and called you trash. I gave you 48 hours to cancel this sale and save yourselves. You chose to look me in the eye and tell me I was dead to you." Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her authoritative facade completely crumbled under the weight of my icy stare. "I am not releasing a single cent," I continued, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "The house is gone. The money belongs to my corporate holding account. And you should be down on your knees thanking me, Beatrice. Be grateful I am simply taking my money back through a civil lien rather than handing that fraud report over to a detective and sending you to a federal penitentiary for forgery." I turned to Lawrence and Malik, who had been standing silently by my side, bearing witness to the entire spectacular collapse. "Let us go," I told them quietly. "Our business here is completely finished." I did not wait for a response from my family. I turned my back on them and walked toward the conference room doors. I stepped over the shattered crystal on the floor, the sound of my heels echoing sharply in the quiet hallway. I walked out of the title agency, leaving my parents and my sister sitting in a glass box of their own making, entirely broke, entirely exposed, and entirely alone. 3 months have passed since the glass shattered in that downtown conference room. The fallout was swift, absolute, and entirely public. The regional healthcare provider made good on their threat. When the end of the month arrived, and Trevor failed to produce the $635,000 he had embezzled, their legal team handed the entire black folder over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The authorities did not waste any time. Trevor was arrested on a Tuesday morning right in the middle of a golf swing at his exclusive country club. It was a spectacular public humiliation. He was formally indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. He is currently sitting in a holding facility awaiting a trial that will inevitably send him to federal prison for a very long time. Vanessa saw her polished, arrogant country club life evaporate overnight. The bank immediately froze all of their joint accounts pending the federal investigation. The two luxury sports utility vehicles she loved to flaunt were repossessed in the middle of the night. Without Trevor's stolen funds to pay the massive mortgage, the bank foreclosed on their modern farmhouse within weeks. The golden child who had sat at my dining room table and mocked my single status was forced to move into a cramped, incredibly outdated two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. She is currently working long shifts at a retail cosmetics counter just to keep the lights on and help pay the massive retaining fees for Trevor's criminal defense attorney. She sacrificed her relationship with her only sister to protect a man who had completely destroyed her life. She is drowning in debt, and she is entirely alone. As for James and Beatrice, they truly believed they could simply retreat to the custom suburban mansion I had built for them and pretend the entire nightmare never happened. They thought they could ride out the storm in luxury, sweeping their betrayal under the rug. But they made a fatal error. During their frantic, arrogant rush to forge the quitclaim deed and sell the property, to save Trevor, they completely ignored the county tax notices. They defaulted on the property taxes. That default triggered a legal clause in my corporate lien. Because the property was in financial jeopardy due to their gross negligence, Sterling Property Holdings officially exercised its right to foreclose on the lien. The legal proceedings were swift and entirely merciless. Because my mother had committed federal forgery to obtain the title in the first place, they had absolutely no standing in a court of law. The judge stripped their names from the deed and handed 100% of the ownership rights back to my private limited liability company. I owned the house completely free and clear. I gave my parents exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. I did not go to see them. I let Lawrence and the local sheriff's department handle the official eviction notices. I heard from a neighbor that watching them pack their belongings into a rented moving truck was a deeply pathetic sight. They were forced to move into a small, drafty rental duplex on the south side of town, right back where they started before I ever tried to elevate their lives. My father lost his custom woodworking shop. My mother lost her prized rose garden and her precious social standing in the church. In the end, as they sat in that tiny rental, they finally realized they had sacrificed the only daughter who truly cared for them all for a white son-in-law who viewed them as nothing more than disposable trash. I stand on the wraparound porch of the custom mansion one last time, letting the cool autumn breeze brush against my face. The house is completely empty now, stripped of the toxic memories and the heavy betrayal that once filled its halls. I did not keep the property. It was an asset, not a home, and it was time to liquidate it properly. Yesterday afternoon, I signed the final closing documents and sold the house to a lovely, hard-working young couple who are expecting their first child. They fell in love with the spacious yard and the beautiful neighborhood. They will actually appreciate the safety and warmth this house provides, filling it with the kind of genuine love my family never could. I pull my phone from my designer purse and look at the notification screen. The wire transfer has officially cleared. A massive six-figure sum has just been deposited directly into my personal wealth management account. It is a spectacular return on my investment. As I stare at the glowing numbers, my phone suddenly begins to vibrate in my hand. The caller identification flashes brightly across the screen. It is Beatrice. This is probably her 50th attempt to contact me this month. Maybe she wants to apologize. Maybe she is desperate and wants to beg for money to help Vanessa pay her rent. It simply does not matter anymore. I look at the screen feeling absolutely no anger, no guilt, and no sorrow. I do not even bother declining the call. I simply press the block contact button, silencing the vibration forever. I slip the phone back into my purse, walk down the paved driveway, and get into the driver's seat of my car. I start the engine and drive away from the suburbs, heading back toward the glittering city skyline. I am going back to my real friends, my thriving corporate empire, and a beautiful life that I built entirely with my own two hands. The revenge was never just about taking the house back or exposing a criminal. The true sweetness of this reality is the profound liberation of finally realizing I never needed their approval to begin with. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace, let me know in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding the respect you deserve.